Hello. So in this video, we're going to talk about deconstruction and political slogans. Now, when I say deconstruction here, I mean proper deconstruction, the type theorized by Jacques Derrida, the French literary critic and philosopher. One of the principles of deconstruction is that texts contain more meanings than they are intended to, more meanings than the surface level reading tells us. And often those meanings are contradictory. That is, the language of a text or the ways in which it presents ideas or whatever it is will often undermine the ostensible message of that text, the thing that officially the text wants you to know, believe, understand, whatever it is. So we're going to take a look at two political slogans I've seen recently. One, a campaign slogan during the 2024 Senate elections here in Pennsylvania, and the other, a bumper sticker that I saw recently. So to start with the political slogan from the Senate campaign, in Pennsylvania in 2024, we have a Democratic senator named Bob Casey. There is less a campaign for Casey's opponent, McCormick, and more just a campaign against Casey. I haven't really seen anybody try and convince us that McCormick is a good Senate candidate. But I have seen a lot of attack ads on Bob Casey, many of which revolve around the standard Republican talking points at this point. Inflation is bad, the border is in crisis, etc., etc. And depending on where you stand on the political spectrum, if you're in the US and have an opinion about US politics, those are more or less genuine or disingenuine talking points. But in one of the ads, they take aim at Casey for his support of the Biden administration's economic policies, which many people, especially on the right, mistakenly believe have caused inflation. I don't want to get into a whole discussion about what has caused inflation, or more accurately, greedflation in the US right now, but what they say, the slogan that they use in this ad, critiquing Casey for his role in the inflation situation, is tell Bob Casey to fix his inflation disaster, or something to those effects, his inflation nightmare, whatever it is. I think it's disaster. Now, on the surface, this is an attack ad. This is an anti-Bob Casey ad. So the official message at the level of sort of intent is, do not vote for Bob Casey because his policies are bad for the economy. That's what the ad wants you to take from it, right? That's the objective, is to stop you from voting for Bob Casey. But if we actually think about the content of that slogan, tell Bob Casey to fix his inflation disaster, that requires voting for him, right? I mean, how is he going to fix it? If we elect McCormick, his opponent, how is Bob Casey going to fix his inflation disaster? He couldn't. He'd then just be a private citizen. He'd be a regular person with no more power than me to impact the economy as a whole. And so what we see is this is a very direct and clear example of contradictory elements at work within a text. The official objective of the ad, again, is to get people to vote against Bob Casey. But if we comply with what it literally says, that requires voting for him. It requires the exact opposite of the thing that the ad actually wants us to do. So here we have a very direct sort of deconstructionist element to this, the overt contradiction, the overt failure to understand on the part of the creators of this ad that what they are in fact telling us to do is the opposite of what they want us to do. So we've got that element. The other one that I want to talk about and deconstruct is this bumper sticker I saw the other day that had a picture of the US Constitution, and the text read, "It doesn't need to be rewritten, just reread." Now, I assume that this is in reference to those, particularly on the left, who argue that the US is so systemically racist, sexist, economically unequal, etc., that the system cannot be reformed. It must be, we have to have a complete revolution, a complete abandonment of the Constitution as such in favor of an alternate form of government, preferably, I don't know, anarcho-socialist or something like this. Whatever it is that particular social critic wants. Theoretically, this could also be an anti-right-wing thing because the right in the US, particularly their presidential candidate, Donald J. Trump, former president, have proposed a number of things that are overtly and obviously unconstitutional. For instance, the idea that the president can, by executive order, abolish birthright citizenship. Can't do it. It's against the Constitution. It is directly unconstitutional because that is a constitutionally protected right. It would require an amendment to undo it. The president cannot abolish part of the Constitution by executive order. But Trump and others have proposed this. Anyway, I suspect that that's not the case because that requires a more, I'd say that requires a more sophisticated set of logical connections. And I don't know that I would call just completely ignoring elements of the Constitution rewriting as such. Anyway, it doesn't really matter for the point that I want to make, which is that this bumper sticker contains within it itself the contradiction, right? The idea, it doesn't need to be rewritten, just reread. But of course, if we reread the Constitution, one of the things that we will find is that the framers very much intended it to be rewritten. There is a mechanism within the Constitution itself for how to rewrite the document. It's called the amendment process, right? We have rewritten the Constitution 27 times, I think. The idea that the Constitution, because right, the implicit component of the first part, it doesn't need to be rewritten, is that the Constitution is fine as it is. There is nothing that needs to be changed about it. It is complete in itself. That's the implication. But then just reread points us back to the limitations of the first part. The second portion of this bumper sticker highlights the insufficiency of the first part, right? Because if we reread the Constitution, for those of us who actually know something about the Constitution, we don't need to reread it, we already know this. But if we reread the Constitution, we find that, in fact, it is meant to be rewritten. The idea that it is perfect and set in stone for all eternity to never ever be changed in any way is contrary to the ethos of the Constitution. It's contrary to what the document itself and the people who wrote it intended for it. So, again, we have this undermining of the fundamental principle. So Slavoj Žižek would, in his analysis of The Sound of Music, he uses these two terms, the political level and the textual level, right? We have sort of that. The political level, the official, ostensible message that we're supposed to get. don't vote for Bob Casey because he's bad for the economy. The Constitution is fine as it is. There's no need for change. This is the political level, right? The official message of these slogans, bumper stickers, etc. And yet, at the level of texture, at the level of the actual presentation of that idea, the mechanics through which it is presented, we get almost the opposite message. Vote for Bob Casey to fix the inflation situation. He cannot fix it if we don't vote for him. Therefore, the slogan itself tells us we must vote for him if we want the inflation situation fixed. Reread the Constitution and find that it is intended to be rewritten. So again, this is the fundamental move of deconstruction, right? Is that texts contain within themselves a multiplicity of messages, and often some of those messages at least will be contradictory. These are particularly egregious examples, but the reason that this is all important is not to pick on this campaign slogan, although they're poorly made commercials, or this bumper sticker, which is what it is. The point ultimately, the thing that we as people interested in rhetoric should be taking, and people interested in critical reading should be taking, is to be thinking carefully and critically about what we write, how we write it. If you are a creator of political slogans, or if you are somebody who engages in political debates, particularly when it comes to things like talking points, consider them critically rather than simply restating them. Just because X politician or X pundit, news commentator, whatever it is, has said a thing, doesn't mean that it makes sense. So be aware of that. And the same thing in terms of just media consumption in general. Consider critically what is being said, not just about politics, but about things in general in the world, anything that's of import in any sense. Consider what's being said and whether or not the way that it's being said, the assumptions that underpin it, etc., are trustworthy.